Good afternoon. Earlier this week, the government updated our Covid-19 strategy for the continued suppression of the virus in Guernsey, and we will continue to publish further updates to the strategy as we navigate the easing of the lockdown measures. We entered lockdown to save islanders' lives. This was our focus for the weeks during our initial pandemic response. And we've actually suppressed that virus in the island, and we're now moving through our safe exit framework. Having, to date, achieved our objectives to protect the health of the island, we're now focusing on safeguarding islanders' livelihoods. And as part of that process, the States Assembly this week debated the future of Guernsey's economy from their perspective. And States members offered a number of interesting suggestions and approaches, and I look forward to working with members in the months ahead as we begin our economic recovery and renewal. A new political oversight group for economic recovery has been convened, and an economic council is being formed to utilise the local expertise within our island. And these two groups will help to inform the government's efforts as we support jobs and local businesses in the weeks and months ahead. And don't forget, it is not solely about the economy. We will also be looking at the challenges which have arisen within our society, our environment and our community as a result of Covid-19. Elsewhere, we've begun new measures at the airport this week with a pilot scheme to test incoming passengers on the Blue Islands Lifeline flights, who will be given the option to take part in the trial. And part of saving livelihoods is coming out of lockdown as quickly as possible while avoiding a sudden and rapid increase in infections and minimising other indirect health and social and economic ramifications, all of which impact upon islanders' well-being. At the press conference on Monday, the Minister for Economic Development announced her intention to move to Level 2 of our Safe Exit Framework next Friday the 12th of June. And Level 2 is about being safer together as we move towards a new normal of living with Covid-19. And we can move to the next level thanks in large part to everyone who's adhered to the health guidelines and have acted responsibly. Thanks to your efforts, we've bought time to build up our PPE stocks, to construct our Nightingale facility, to increase our testing capacity and roll out antibody tests, to deliver the legislative changes that we needed to do, and to mobilise the largest support package for both individuals and businesses in the history of our island. But we mustn't become complacent. We have 3 active cases found through a combination of proactive testing and screening, as well as self-referral. Our testing capacity has continued to improve, and to date, a total of 8,465 PCR tests have been conducted to check for the presence of Covid-19, and 5,728 antibody tests have been completed on essential workers to check whether people have been in contact with Covid-19. And the second round of community antibody testing has also been completed, and the latest results of the study are due to be published next week. Now, this means the virus is still out there. It is still present in our island. And the current data tells us that the number is low, very low. But it remains vitally important that we all continue to do our part to protect our community and keep this virus in check. So continue to physically distance, continue to maintain good hand hygiene, and continue to follow government guidelines. This is how we will suppress the spread of the virus and continue the gradual and safe, deliberate return to normality. Now, it must be stressed that our move into Level 2 next week is dependent on the data and feedback we receive next week and the feedback we're going to receive over the weekend regarding how people adhere to the measures we presently have in place during the course of this weekend. And can I just reiterate, we are in a very good position, and this is because of the decisions we have taken, and also thanks to the cooperation and support of islanders, and without whom we would not be in the place that we now are. So that's hopefully the end of a short statement, and we'll now be taking questions from the media. And as ever, just to run through the names hopefully we've got from BBC, we've got Freddie, from ITV, we've got Caroline, from Bailiwick, we've got Elodie, from the JP, we've got Ian, and for Channel 103, we've got Alex. So we'll try and start with 2 questions, and then we'll see how we go and see how the time runs. And if Freddie can kick off first from the BBC, 1 question at a time, please.
Thank you, Chief Minister. I'm hoping you can explain in as much detail as possible your progress towards opening the island's borders. And if within that answer you could talk about the proposed date for allowing flights and ferries to take off and come into the island, an update on the testing trial that you've alluded to in your statement just there, that's been going on for about a week now, and also what's being considered in terms of travel to and from France, because we know about travel to the UK and the quarantine measures that are not imposed on Channel Islanders going there. But what about if we're going to France? So if you could kind of summarise all of that, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I like the thing about concise questions and concise answers, but there we go. Right. So in terms of the the testing regimes of where we are, which I think was part of a very long question. So the antibody. So we've got two lots of testing. We've got the PCR testing. We've got the antibody testing. The PCR testing were the numbers I just gave you, which were I think around 8,000 plus. Which is how many we've tested to date. That is around.
Sorry, just to interrupt you. The testing was specifically about the trial at the airport that's been going on for about a week now. Just wanted an update on that in terms of testing.
Fine, we're just finished. So PCR 8,000 odd. We're doing 500 a day on average as capacity. That's what we've been aiming to get to. So the next stage in all that testing, as I said, we've got the PCR going on island, we've got the antibody testing going on island. Is the pilot scheme that you've obviously referred to up at the airport. I emphasise it is still a pilot. It is still relatively early days, and the sort of official kickoff was on Monday, and obviously we are Friday. Essentially, we will start getting the results of that back sometime during the course of next week, if not at the end of next week, or in respect of the end of next week. So it's a little bit early to talk. I know there's been. The feedback, very informal feedback I've had to date is that generally most people have volunteered to take the tests, that I believe it's been well received. There will always be some teething problems in there. That's the whole point of having a pilot scheme. But until we get that pilot and we know we've got robust controls at the border, at this stage we can't say when exactly we'll be able to open the borders for everybody. That's dependent on two factors. Obviously, one is when the airlines start flying, and two, when we've got confidence that the system we have, which we believe is robust, can remain robust and be scaled up to deal with potential larger numbers. So a little bit too early to answer directly your question around when. The other point I would make is Jersey is a very much interconnected, internationally connected community. Despite this sort of geological position, we are not just an island as a community. Therefore, there at some point will have to be and others to travel to and from this island in a different way to just a 14-day quarantine. That's the purpose of the pilot. For the moment, we've just got to make sure that whatever that scheme looks like, is got to be as robust as the systems we have in place to ensure we can continue to suppress the virus. Now, there was a second aspect to your question. You can make that your second question if you prefer, but...
Well, I'd rather it was part of my first question, if that's all right. It was about France, travel to and from France, and whether islanders will have to quarantine. I understand conversations are ongoing at the moment. If you could update us on those.
So there are conversations happening. Again, it all wraps up into quite a complicated international picture, and it's whether, obviously, there's the public comments that have been made about European countries and how they will interact with the United Kingdom, and whether that because we've had actually a much lower spread of the virus throughout the community, whether we can be treated differently or not. To be honest, it's too early to say. It's something we're exploring, but at this stage, there is no change in the present position.
Okay, thank you very much. On to my second question. It's been mentioned in the past few days about the economy. Obviously, there's been that big debate in the States. And both the Treasury Minister and the Economic Development Minister have talked about targeted fiscal stimulus going into the economy. And it was mentioned the other day by the Treasury Minister, this could include towards businesses that are working in tourism and measures to get people working from home and also reducing our carbon footprint. Can you tell us more about what these targeted measures are going to be and when they're going to be announced, please?
Again, I think you're slightly ahead of you're asking the right question, as they say, but at the wrong time, I think is the expression. So All of these factors are things that we are looking at and we are trying to consider. There are three aspects we've got to deal with at the moment. One is continue to manage the health crisis, okay? And that is around obviously managing as we go through. That's obviously about the safe exit framework and things like that. Two is about getting businesses back to where they were. In other words, trying to get back to the new normal. So if you like, that's about the support that we already have. That's the co-funding payroll scheme and things like that. Three is the longer looking side of the economic recovery and essentially preparing for a potential financial dip or economic dip, as has already been alluded to through people like the Ireland's Economic Advisor, the FPP, etc., etc. That last stage, we have started those discussions. As I said, we've got the economic political oversight group, which is for the economic recovery, is in place. The Economic Council is in the process of being put together. That's about bringing in local talent and expertise from all sorts of aspects within the island. That's in the process of being created. I hope that will be finalised sometime next week. And in the meantime, there are early discussions going on around what might be the type of stimulus we need to look at. If you go back to the sort of 2008-2009 financial crisis, we had things that were temporary, targeted and timely. I think those principles are still going to apply. So we know that as a principle, but the detail is still being talked about. There are different measures in play. There are some discussions happening with different industry kind of representatives to see what might be the kind of area that they're looking at. I will say that for me, if you look at the likely people who are going to struggle further, potentially in the winter season, depending what happens over sort of June, July, August and September, hospitality, in my view, will need some form of support unless things go vastly different to what we expect. And so from my point of view, there is certainly a message that should be going out there that we're not going to be forgetting them. Okay, Caroline. You're silent at the moment.
Sorry, I'm there. Thank you so much. Firstly, Guernsey this week has fined somebody for breaking their 2-week quarantine. We've put together quite a few anecdotal reports of breaches here. How are you policing quarantine and what are the sanctions?
So the whole thing and principle applied by the Chief of Police is that we're policing the virus, not the people, and that's been their approach. So they've tried to bring in sanctions, applying the sanctions as the last resort. So generally, where people have transgressed, they've been spoken to, they've been advised, whether it's quarantine, whether it's around distancing, and it's only been as a last resort that a sanction been applied. And I think that position maintains the same. But I certainly do. I always remember at the very early days, we had people who were meant to be self-isolating and weren't. And basically, they were tracked down fairly swiftly. And shall we say, words of advice were given. We still try and do that, but please don't forget that there is a sanction ultimately behind it.
So how are they sort of policing it at the moment? Are they regularly checking with people in quarantine?
I don't have that level of detail with me. My understanding is that there is a process there, that they do have essentially a list of people who are meant to be self-isolating, and that there are checks made. As to how often that is done, I cannot tell you that. I can seek to find out, because obviously that's quite a significant level of operational detail that I try not to get dragged into too many times. If there is a problem, obviously it comes up to us. To date, I'm not aware of any significant problems, and as I said, generally the police have been in the position of giving words of advice, and in general people have acted very responsibly.
Thank you. So my second question, Jersey schools are opening on Monday. What's your message to parents who may be still too scared to send their children back to school?
I think in all of this, we absolutely recognise that there are some people generally who are still concerned or nervous around where we are, about the risk of getting contracting Covid-19 and all that sort of stuff. And where people are particularly vulnerable, they should always talk it through their family, get some advice from the GP and see what's specific to their own circumstances. If they've got particular concerns, the helpline and all the other support is there, and do make use of it. And in terms of the schools, it is obviously only a limited phase going back, and we'll see. Again, the intention, as I understand matters, is we'll see how it operates and then try and bring further year groups back in a slow and controlled manner. And there will always be individual challenges in that. But again, it's if a parent is concerned because of their particular health issues, it is not mandatory at this stage. It is very much, there is a recognition that everybody has to adapt to these changing circumstances in the ways that they are feeling comfortable.
Thank you.
Okay, that was your two questions, wasn't it? So, Elodie Bailiwick.
Yes, good afternoon, Chief Minister, and thank you for taking the time. Figures given by the Health Minister earlier this week in the Assembly showed an average of 162 tests carried out between the 11th and the 29th of May. If you look at data for this week, only 243 tests were carried out between Wednesday and Thursday. Can you explain why Jersey still not has reached the 5 tests a day target that was promised from the 11th of May?
Essentially, what we said is we've got the capacity up to where we want it to be, which is, as I understand it, we are at the capacity to do 500 tests a day if we need to. It's essentially the number of people coming in wanting a test has not reached that capacity. So we can only test the people who come to us. You cannot force someone to go and have a PCR test. And there are certain issues when you do have a test as to how long, even when you're having that test, you have to, if you think you've got Covid-19, you do have to self-isolate at home. I think it's for a minimum of 7 days, even as you're having that test whilst the results come through. So there are certain consequences within that, and but it is around. We have got a capacity of 500. You cannot force people to take the test if they don't want it at this stage.
Okay, but just to clarify, even in your reply to Freddie earlier, you mentioned that you were doing 500 tests a day. So what does the government keep saying? We are doing 500 tests a day.
Oh, sorry, that was probably loose language. We have the capacity to do 500 tests. And I think the point, as I said, looking very quickly for the number I was looking for, we've got, so samples tested 8,465. If you look at how that has increased over the last few weeks, that's significantly gone up. And, for me, that's a real positive thing. We've been saying we're going to get the testing improved. We've obviously got a fairly robust process in there. And if you look at the volumes we're dealing with now, we are doing, I would say, pretty well. And so people should really be taking comfort that we've got a good, robust testing system in there if they need to take advantage of it. Okay, what's your other question?
So the UK has stated earlier that masks will be compulsory on public transport from the 15th of June, given that more than 30 London bus drivers have lost their lives to coronavirus and that more islanders will be using the public transport as lockdown eases further. Will the government introduce the same rule?
At this stage, the advice remains that masks, particularly inside buildings and transport, are advised. At this stage, they are not mandatory in terms of something that's legally enforceable, but the government policy advice is that they should be worn, particularly inside. Obviously, the risk is a lot lower outside, and particularly if you've got the ability to distance yourself. But I think at this stage, there is no present intention to change, but we'll keep monitoring that. And again, it comes down to the advice, it comes down to people's behaviour. It also comes down to, at this stage, we still have a very low level of active cases on the island. So again, it's all around the balance of risk and at what point you need to put those measures in on a mandatory basis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right, Ian, JP.
Good afternoon, Chief Minister. My first question, economics related. Well, we initially budgeted hundreds of millions for economic recovery, seeing the economy through the crisis. Probably haven't had the worst case scenario. Is it fair to say we're going to actually spend a lot less than we originally budgeted for? And has Jersey's economy proved to be more resilient than you expected?
I think actually it's two slightly different questions there. So one is, have we spent as much money as we budgeted for? So to date, the take-up is less. So that would tend to imply, but, again, we're only just June now, so the co-funding for June the co-funding will apply to the May payroll. We'll have to see what that take-up is. and that so it can each change on a monthly basis depending on circumstances. But again, as we've always been saying, it's always been a balance of risk and concerns around the dealing with the health impacts of Covid-19, the wider well-being aspects of the negative impacts of the measures we put in place for Covid-19, and that does then go into the economic consequences, because that does have a well-being impact as well. And so the fact that we did manage to keep, so for example, garden centres open all the way through, where certain other jurisdictions didn't, will have helped in that very small area their economic position or their financial position. The fact that we brought the alfresco open, whatever it was, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, will have helped some of those businesses get some cash flow coming in. So what I can't tell you is the economic impact going to be better or worse at this stage, because it's too early to tell to get that data in. The other question will be in terms of the financial results. So there's the economic impact on the island, and there's the financial impact on the government's finances. And again, that's a little bit too early to assess. Obviously, everybody's just got their tax returns in for the end of May, or a lot of people have rather. And then you'll also have the businesses and how much tax is being paid. And so we will get updates on May later on during June, and that will then start getting us a better flavour for where we are.
Okay, sure, thank you.
Okay.
Earlier this week, the Environment Minister said that a support package for the island's fishermen was going to be signed off imminently. Has this been done? What progress has been made with this, and what's this package going to look like? Pausing. I've certainly seen emails on the matter. My understanding was it had been signed off. If it hasn't been signed off, it is imminently due to be signed off, and by that I'm talking days. My understanding that, in fact, I thought the Treasury Minister had indicated, or somebody from Treasury had indicated, that they were expecting it to be signed off on either Tuesday or Wednesday. Sorry, I haven't seen. I'm not aware that there is any problem in getting it approved. So if it hasn't been signed off, it will be imminently. Okay. Do you have any detail on the package?
Not at this stage. All I can say is it is a matter of merit very much for the Treasury Minister and particularly the Environment Minister. All I know is it very much mirrors, as I understand it, whatever the UK package that was put in place.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alex, 103.
Thank you, Chief Minister. We've heard that a lot of businesses that were previously shut will be able to reopen as and when level 2 of lockdown comes in. But perhaps some of those business owners and people who are needing to return to work may still have children off school. What sort of childcare support will be in place for anyone who has to go back to work but still has children who need to be looked after?
This is one of the issues we are dealing with all the way through. Don't forget, the recommendation still remains that if we can stay at home, if you can work from home, still try to continue working from home, which I think is again still important to reiterate. And in terms of when you say childcare packages, obviously we've been supporting essential workers all the way through the crisis in terms of being able to send their children to either nursery school or primary school, in other words, for teaching to continue. And as far as I'm aware, that will continue to operate.
But in terms of the capacity, as we understand it, there may be some parents who aren't able to keep their children in school all the way through, as the class sizes are reaching the maximums the schools that are still open have been able to provide. So if more people are due to be going back to work, say dentists or hair and beauty salons, will there be an increase in the number of classes that will be open to children of people who are at work?
I think that is probably better directed to the Education Minister when you can get hold of her. As I've understood it, the difficulty we have is we know in all of these things, as you start phasing it through, there will be points where it will be slightly unfair in different areas initially because you're trying to phase things back through. So the principle is, let's get the years that we can back in a phased basis. Let's make sure that works. And then hopefully within a fairly short period of time, we can then ratchet that up. So I can't give you a more detailed answer to that yet. other than to say for essential employees there have been measures in place, and certainly the last update I had was that there was still capacity in that area. Obviously, as that wider world changes, every individual person will have individual circumstances. Obviously, if there's particular issues they have, always ring the helpline. That's one of the reasons it's there for, and they can be directed off to somewhere to get some advice. But what I'm trying to, I suppose, say is that with the schools going back on Monday, that first week will be A level. As things, a phase, should I say? As things then progress, one would expect over the coming weeks, further year groups or further elements of year groups to come back. But it is a phased approach, and that's why it's always slightly difficult when you're trying to restart an island in the way that we're having to. Second question.
Okay, just touching on, I think it was Freddie mentioned earlier about the airport testing trial. Obviously, Jersey's only got the airport and the harbour in terms of sort of exit and entry points. Are we any further forwards on what sort of measures could be taken as and when commercial travel is available, as it was outlined in level 2? So in terms of actual, would we be taking passengers' details as they arrive, or sort of compulsory testing?
So that's the point of the pilot that we're running, is that to see what measures will and won't work and what can be applied to a bigger number of people, a greater number of people coming into the island. Obviously, what we're doing at the moment is at the airport, because it's the lifeline flights that are coming in that make a very good exercise, a trial run, a pilot run, as I keep saying, if you pardon the pun, to just see what the teething problems are. And there will always be teething problems on something like this. Nobody has, nobody has had to deal with this kind of pandemic crisis for a very, very long time. And so all the way through, we learn and watch from other jurisdictions, and we apply it to us. At the moment, the test that we've got as the pilot is pretty robust. And I'd say it's a combination of a PCR test when you arrive on a voluntary basis, and then there's a combination of a number of antibody tests thereafter. Until we've got the analysis from that, and until we've got a little bit more certainty, and I'm expecting that to be over the next, I think, the certainty around international travel, the lack of certainty around international travel will start changing, and this is my guess, over the next 5-10 days, maybe 3 weeks. And that will then give us time to assess the pilot and adjust accordingly. So again, the scheme is robust. It's the right thing to be doing at this time. It's a good thing to be doing at this time. I think you'll find, again, we are ahead of certain other jurisdictions within the British sphere of influence, and that's around, again, trialling it, testing it. Let's get it right for the island.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall we go around one at a time? So, Freddie, do you want another one?
Yes, thank you. I'll just continue with that theme, if I may. So I think there's a lot of feeling among islanders that the airport and opening up the borders could well be the next kind of big challenge facing the island, because the noises we've been hearing from government increasingly have been that you're feeling as though you have something of a control over the virus within the island. But once you open up the borders and people start coming in again, obviously that could change things. So when you kind of look at all these measures that you are thinking of bringing in, firstly, how realistic is it, do you think this is going to work? And secondly, when you talk about the robust testing at the ports, if somebody proves to be negative when they first arrive, you're then testing them on subsequent days. So does that mean that that first test doesn't necessarily tell you the answer, and they could then enter the island but have the virus?
Right. Let's try and be as clear as we can. There is no risk-free approach to dealing with this virus. It's a balance, as I've said earlier today and all the way through these press conferences. It's a balance between dealing with COVID-19 itself and dealing with the other consequences, if you like, the wider well-being, which can include economic, through the consequences or the measures we've put in place. So that is why the approach to dealing with it going forward is a multi-layered approach. That means you've got to have a better contact tracing system in place. At the moment, ours is quite a robust and beefed up manual system. So we've more than doubled the capacity in that area. It's around having better testing capacity, which is the reference again to the PCR side, which goes back to Elodie's point, I think, around a capacity of 500 a day on average. It's around having now the antibody testing, which again, there's not many other jurisdictions within the British Isles that are able to do the antibody testing at this stage. Now, it's not perfect, but it is, you learn from it all the way through and you can keep improving. So you've got different measures in place. And as technology changes, that will also change in terms of what approach we can do. But we are absolutely determined to make sure it's always as robust as can be. And we think this is going to be with us for a while. So you've got those layers in place. And then you've got to say that the other measures that you then have that will come out of the pilot scheme. So, for example, that you shouldn't be travelling if you're showing symptoms. So then what you're coming down to is the balance of risk that someone who isn't showing symptoms is travelling and is travelling in those kind of, depending which bit of advice you take, the sort of 2 or 3 days when they don't have symptoms but they are contagious. And at that point, what happens if somebody does bring it in, you've then got to say, right, if you can identify that, can you trace it back? And can you then get in touch with anybody who might have been affected? So don't forget, at this stage, the transmission through the community as a whole has been slow, and that is one of the reasons, for example, that the physical distancing is still important. But all the way through, you follow the advice that we get, the medical advice, and that is around the balance of risk between the individual and the community. Does that make sense? Okay, Caroline.
Thank you. The government strategy that was published this week says that you will now be able to publish where and how people have contracted the virus, such as in care homes or in family groups. But last week, the health minister said that this wasn't possible because you needed to protect for data protection reasons. So when will you be publishing this data?
I know that the reason I pause is we get various presentations at various points in the week or at the beginning of each week or whatever of the kind of new data that they might be trying to bring together. And then usually if we say, yes, that looks good, or if alternatively is there a privacy issue, for example, then they'll go away and rework it. So on the basis it's in the strategy, it will no doubt have been agreed that we can do it, making sure we do respect the privacy. And I would expect, therefore, that to be coming out probably in either whether it's at the end of this week or the end of next week, but in that kind of time frame. But let me go away and just find out what the issues are on that particular area. But that's our view, is that to date, as we've been navigating it through, we've been trying to always get this balance between what is public, what information is actually in the public domain anyway, and what information actually, if it was released, allows a particular individual to be identified, and in particular at a time when, depending on the circumstances, it might be a particularly sensitive area for the family. And it's always that balance through. So I'll go and have a look, but we are trying to get, I would hope you accept, that over the course of the last sort of 8-10 weeks, we've significantly improved the amount of information that's been brought out.
Thank you.
Okay, Elodie?
Hi. Early on during the pandemic, Jersey and Guernsey's competition regulator SACRI divorced amid disagreement about how it should be run. The islands then decided to pursue different virus strategies instead of working together, particularly with regards to travel. Then a couple of weeks ago, a Guernsey politician called Jersey government a bunch of bubbling idiots. How does the government intend to repair this fractured relationship with Guernsey?
We don't tend to base the status of the relationship between Jersey and Guernsey, which I would say was very good, on the somewhat emotional and ill-informed comments of an individual member of the Guernsey Assembly. And I know it did cause, well anyway, I have discussed it with, obviously, the Chief Minister of Guernsey. We have a very good working relationship, and that continues. And so the islands, as we've said, the islands do follow slightly different profiles. Our objectives are always the same, but we continue to work together very closely. Okay, Ian.
Okay, going back to some points which have been raised in previous press conferences I've attended, there's been some allusion to the fact we might look at selling capital assets owned by the states to fund the crisis to help replenish our reserves. Would you advocate this? And if so, which assets do you think might be saleable, and how could this be achieved?
Sorry, what you said? We do have what? There was a statement you said.
In some previous press conferences, it's been I've asked ministers about how we're going to replenish reserves, how we're going to fund the crisis, pay for it in the future. There's been things mentioned, for example, tax rises, or and another thing that was mentioned was potential sale of government-owned assets. The External Relations Minister actually said that he thinks there's like very high value states assets which sit there doing nothing. I just wanted to ask you, would you as Chief Minister advocate any sales of assets owned by the states for this purpose? And if so, which ones, and how could that be achieved?
All right, sorry, I thought you said something else just towards the end of your question. Look, the high level argument, comment on this is nothing's off the table and everything's on the table at this stage. And that will depend on, those are literally the types of discussions that we'll be having to have over the next few weeks. And so if you take the elements down, part of that is around managing cash flow, which can be around, can we accelerate certain things that generate cash? That's not a tax rise or anything along those lines. Is there stuff you can do? Because actually the island's been in lockdown for a good number of weeks, that has meant, for example, that might have slowed down recruitment possibilities. That will mean in the budget things might have slipped a month for the sake of argument. That means there's been a cash flow benefit, if you like, to our bottom line. And so that's one element. There's an element around, do you look at, on the capital project side, this is relevant to the overall round of what we're trying to deal with, okay? If you look at capital projects, when we put the government plan together, I think as the FPP did actually raise the query as to would potentially it be inflationary? In other words, overstimulate the market. Now, it's obviously something we've got to keep an eye on, but it does mean that hopefully a number of projects will be in a better position to launch earlier and then basically to support industry, but also meet our objectives. But when there may be others, you might turn around and say, well, actually, can we defer that? It doesn't mean cancel. That might mean you just change the timing on them. Is there, within the growth expenditure, is there something there that you need to reprioritise given where we are and given the potential impact? At what point? And it always depends what you need. There's the purist argument of what is a tax rise, which is particular labels of revenue, or is it an increase in charges, or is it and other things that we do? But if you look at it from the point of view of money that we take out of people's pockets as overall as the tax, at what point in time will you need to do that, and do you need to, and should you? Because what's the economic impact of doing that on business? And so there are a variety of areas that we are looking at within the other side of things, which I hasten to add is not austerity in any shape or form. Does that mean that with the impact of a lot more remote working and things like that, are there things that we have been doing differently that we can continue to do differently and actually in a more efficient way? So therefore efficiencies will still be incredibly important. And then you come down to what's on the balance sheet, which would include capital assets, and should we be holding them in a different way? Should you be selling part of that or not? That's a valid question to be asking. So I think the point is, at this stage, you cannot say, yes, we're going to sell X or we're going to sell part of Y. What you can say is that we should be looking at all of that, because we are into a different realm of challenge here. Probably, again, one that we have not encountered for at least 75 years, and if not longer. And therefore, everything has to be on the table, but we do not have the luxury of many, many months to consider it. We have the luxury, if you like, of weeks and a short number of months to come out with your initial plan. So that's why I keep splitting it between the things like the co-funding schemes and things that we put in place not that many weeks ago, which will continue to operate and support. And then we've got to get through the next stage of dealing with, as some of that goes away, what support do businesses need to keep them going? And then you start looking at what you're going to do about the economy in the larger context and the slightly more longer term context. So there's a lot of work to do. We've done a huge amount of work in the last few weeks at pace in terms of dealing with the health crisis. We are going to have the same energy and focus to deal with the economic recovery.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alex.
Thank you. In your statement earlier, as you were summing up, you said the move to level 2, that I know some businesses have already been preparing for, is dependent on how islanders sort of adhere to the current measures over this weekend. When is a decision likely to be made and finalised, I suppose, as the best way to put it, on when that move to level 2 will be?
So the formal, I think, decision process takes place, it'll be roughly, I think, middle of next week. Let's be clear, at this stage, we have every expectation that we are going to be going to level 2, but we always make the point that you assess the data we're getting and the most current data we're getting. And if for any reason that's suddenly changed, you might have to turn around and say, well, actually, folks, we've got to delay. We've made it very clear we would like to get through into the next level and through the phasing in that level as swiftly but as safely as we can. And that is why we think and very much thank the majority of islanders who have acted responsibly all the way through. Provided we can keep that, we can keep going safely through the levels that we need to get through. But if we see things that might indicate we are not in that position, we've also got to be prepared either not to proceed or even to pull back slightly. So that's why we keep urging all the way through, don't be complacent, absolutely be careful, but we continue to be in a really good place. And that is because of the decisions we've taken. Okay, well, should we do one more quick one and then let's perhaps wrap up? So, Freddie.
Thank you. Yes, we have spoken to and had viewers and listeners contact us concerned about what the change in the lockdown measures means for them. These are islanders who are vulnerable or severely vulnerable to COVID-19 illnesses. And people who've obviously previously been told to shield. Now, looking in the strategy, there's a bit of a change in tone now saying you should speak to your GP, which I know you've always been saying, but ultimately it's kind of up to you if you want to leave your home. And we heard last week from Dr. Susan Turnbull, there might be, firstly, new guidelines coming through about this. And secondly, that the definition of who's considered vulnerable or seriously vulnerable might be changed based upon national and international evidence. So what's the latest on when those guidelines are coming for the severely vulnerable and when that list of who is now included within that is coming as well?
I think it's fair to say that my expectation on the guidance is that it will be, when I say very, very soon, I think my understanding is within the next few days. I don't think that means in the next few weeks, if you see what I mean. I think it's a very short time frame. I know people are very keen to get that guidance updated. I can't tell you right now that it's going to be issued on Monday for the sake of argument, but I am expecting it to be updated very soon. Okay, but again, and it is really, really difficult for people who are in that kind of category. And again, we have tried to recognise that all the way through, and I really do understand that for some people in that category it's going to be quite a concerning process, and for others actually I think there are some people as well who are very keen just to be able to get out and carry on with their life, and that's why we keep saying this, the stage we're at, it's very much a personal assessment, but please do speak to your GP. I would also say where possible speak to your family, but no, it has been difficult for those people. And what we'd like to try and do is get it to the position that things can be slightly easier. But anyway, hopefully we'll get an update. As I said, I'm expecting something in a matter of days. Okay, Caroline.
I know you said you're currently putting together the Economic Council. Are you able to confirm anybody who is actually going to be part of that council, or who it's likely to be?
At this stage, what I'll do is I'd really only like to announce it when we've got it fully together. There are, I think, more than half have accepted And as I said, I'm just waiting for, just need an update essentially on the final ones as to where they are. And if not, then we're also trying to make sure we've got an appropriate balance essentially across a little bit of society, but also across all industries.
Is there a time frame on when that will be announced?
Well, I'm chasing at the moment. So there's two lots of correspondence that's gone out. Obviously, one is inviting people onto the council. There's also some others where we've actually put specific questions to certain industry representation. From memory, I've asked a response on that by the 10th of June. So that's kind of the time frame we're operating on.
Thank you.
Okay. Elodie Bellewick.
Yes, thank you. Earlier this week, several states member voiced concerns that the government was working against backbenchers rather than with them. Chief Minister, you said at the end of the debate that you were disappointed with the comments, but you never really expanded on them. What are you going to do to make sure that the government retains the support of the Assembly, particularly as it looks to pass important legislation in order to, in relation to Jersey economic recovery and a new government plan later on?
I'm going to address that in two ways, and actually I'm going to thank you for an opportunity because I think it does give us something which Ian might wish to address. So working with backbenchers, I hope that my approach generally, individually, has been trying to work with backbenchers as much as we possibly can. And some absolutely recognise it and some people don't. But that's the way it goes, and it depends on the individual circumstances. And sometimes people get very passionate and then they come back and, and then it's all fine. And that's the nature of politics. It's about actually trying to find agreement with as many people as we can on the individual issues we deal with it and trying to avoid personality. You try and focus on the issue, do constructive criticism, try and work where you can, and agree to agree agree where you can, and agree to disagree when you need to as well. And that's ultimately about democracy. But I think the reason I was going to say, which is there was, for example, something in the JP headlines today, which is the headline where a backbencher was quoted as, I think, being disappointed. I can't remember exactly what the comment was. And it kind of suggested there was a split between that particular backbencher, which was Deputy Pershard, and for example, the council ministers myself. And what was quite interesting is that actually Deputy Pershard made the particular point of ringing me today to apologise and to basically state that as far as she was concerned, the headline did not accurately reflect the interview she'd given. And actually, she gave me a quote, which I thought I'd take the opportunity to use. And she says, "It's my role as a backbencher to scrutinise the work of the government in a way that results in the best outcomes for the island. For me, that has always meant holding members to account in a constructive manner to find solutions." And the sentence, sorry, I missed off at the very beginning, said the article, and especially the headline, did not accurately reflect the interview I gave. So what's one got to be careful is what's one said in the assembly, and that's fine. But sometimes outside, there can be very rightly criticism and constructive criticism of what we do. There's sometimes criticism that becomes personal. And so for me, you deal with the issues, but you try and take the personality out of it. And as I reiterate, there'll be lots of times when we do have to go back and look and see what we could have done better. No question, and there will be things that we could have done better, and that will come out through yourselves, through the media, and through the auspices of scrutiny and PAC and the Control Lord General and all those standard structures that we have. But what we also have to reiterate is that having been in, I'm not sure what week we're in now, sort of week 12, 13 type of territory of when this crisis started, we have to be, I think, in my view, we have to be very alive to the fact that number one is we've got to continue giving reassurance where we can to people, particularly, for example, the vulnerable that some of you have just alluded to. And so, in other words, don't create problems which don't actually exist. And number two is we say again and again and again, from when we started, and if you look at what was coming down the line and what was being reported and happening in other jurisdictions and the real fears and concerns that were happening, we did act. We took quite a lot of decisions on a timely basis. And where we are now is, I would still argue, to date, a very good place. And that's not through luck or just pure haphazard chance. It's because we took the right action at the right time. And I would say, to date, we have got it right. And that is because Ireland as a whole have cooperated, have acted responsibly, but also because we've put all the decisions and the measures in place. And sometimes when you're dealing with a new circumstance and a new problem, you can't always get it in as quickly as one might like. And so, use the testing, for example, it did take slightly longer to get up to the capacity we wanted to be in. But actually, we've managed to maintain the testing that we needed to do as we increased that capacity. In other words, there were no major deficits that arose or dysfunctional aspects that came out of that. And so I think that's what we've always got to look back. There will always be things that we could have done better, but to date, what we have done on the health crisis, I absolutely stand by, and I thank very much the team that I have been leading, but I also thank, and we mustn't forget either, the islanders who have acted responsibly and followed all the guidance we've been doing. But I hope that kind of, in a round, answers your question. Politics is politics. As long as it's constructive criticism, always up for it. When it starts getting personal, that's not politics. Well, it is politics, but it's a different type of politics, which I try not to get involved in. Right. Ian, question.
Okay, I just want to perhaps drill down a bit more on the stimulus packages. I was just wondering, when can we expect an announcement on the stimulus packages? When can we expect the money to be pumped into the economy? And would you be able to maybe give some sort of ballpark figure of what sort of sums might be involved?
The sums involved are going to be more than tens of millions of pounds, I would suggest.
Is that in the initial first wave, or is that going to be over?
Well, I think this is the bit we have to just consider, because it depends. Usual thing. Never a good thing asking an accountant how you count something. It depends whether you consider the co-funding scheme that's carrying on to August as part of the support and recovery bit or part of the stimulus bit going forward, because at some point there'll be a crossover. Because there'll be a point where actually certain businesses, you might just want to say, look, actually they still need more support. We will just extend or continue that co-funding payroll scheme as opposed to having a separate different mechanism that comes through. But equally, there might be other separate mechanisms, and we are looking at some of the lessons that came out of 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. We are looking at other jurisdictions. Ireland's quite a good example. They did it very, very well. And what can you learn from that? So there's discussions going on. I don't want to put anything on the table yet, because I don't like to set hairs running until we know we've got the agreement and the backing of certainly the relevant ministers, preferably all ministers, and that actually we know it works. Because some things that sometimes look initially quite persuasive, you might actually come back and say, actually, there's a better way of doing the same objective. But as I said, for me, so the co-funding's payroll side has been extended to end of August. And I think then and it's going to be reviewed in July. I think what you're going to be seeing is that the fiscal stimulus side will either start picking up when that starts tailing off, and we've got to make a decision as to what we do around that, or will start coming in. That gives you a time frame. We are dealing with weeks to a very few months. It can't be months into a year for the sake of argument. And the reason, again, I use that analogy, if you go back to when I first started in sort of 2005, end of 2005, the big thing I came in on at that point was the 100 million challenge they had at the time, which was the switch to 0-10 and the hole in the finances left at that point. Now, in that time, you had probably, probably a couple of years, that was before my time as well, as I was in the accountancy world at that point. You probably had a couple of years to prepare for it. You had various state debates to get the legislation in place, and then you had implementation that went all the way through, I think, out to about 2008, from what I recall. We do not have the luxury of that amount, and nowhere near that amount of time. If you look at the 2008-9 financial crisis, again, some of that evolved, and that's the issue as well as trying to judge. Is there's the immediate problems now that we're all aware of, which we've got the support packages in place. And there will always be individual bits that haven't quite fitted quite right. But overall, as I said, it's the biggest support package this island's ever seen. So we've acted pretty swiftly there. What we've then got to consider is, what are the risks of a second wave? What might that start looking like? What is when does the sort of, is there a financial aspect? Is there another 2008-9 problem around the corner? Which we hope not, but you've always got to keep that in mind. So we're still a little bit too early to stage to just judge exactly what the timing of everything is, and also actually once you've got the measures in place, how long they will last. And so there's a whole gamut of a whole range of things that we've got to consider. We are doing those discussions, and that's why, as I said, we're trying to operate on very short periods of time. So over the course of this summer, we'll be getting things in place. If we can get some things out earlier, we will do.
Okay, sure. There's some indication there. Thank you. Okay.
Alex.
Thank you. Just finally from me, I think it was Deputy Alves and Dublé in the States earlier this week spoke of potentially implementing a 4-day working week as a means of stimulating the economy and citing companies like Microsoft where this has already been done and proved benefits. Is this something that you'd consider and potentially could see the perks of working here in Jersey?
I suppose my... put it this way, I never say never to very many things. So if somebody was to come along to me and actively demonstrate that in the island context it would be an absolutely fantastic thing, then I would always be up for it. What I will say, but I would need to see the evidence of that, particularly in a time of when you are facing significant financial pressure, and what that might look like. But the other aspect, I suppose, that whatever... I would suspect that we can all pretty well guarantee that the way we all work is going to change, because it has changed. I mean, if you'd actually said in December of last year that the majority of islanders, or that many islanders would be spending huge amounts of their time working at home remotely, that we would be doing virtual press conferences like we have been doing, that actually, for example, the States Assembly was, I believe, the first full assembly in the Commonwealth to meet remotely. All those type of things, let alone how financial services has operated, with a lot of people operating through Zoom or through Teams or whatever. I think somebody would wonder what your what you'd actually been dreaming up at the time. But now, here we are in June, and that's the reality. And that shows. So I think, as I said, I suspect that the way we work has significantly changed, and the ramifications of that, I think we are still digesting. And I think both employers and employees will look at that. And so you can never say never. So without specifically going back to the sort of the 4-day working week, can't really comment on that one. But do I suspect that the way we all work going forward will change? I almost guarantee that.
Okay, thank you.
That's probably the best I can give you on that one. Okay, can I just say thank you very much? I think we'll start drawing things to a close. But can I just say to anybody who's been listening, thank you for listening. But don't forget, we are in a really good place. But again and again for this weekend, I know that at the moment the weather's not quite so good, but please continue to physically distance, maintain good hygiene, and absolutely please do continue following our advice. But have a good weekend, and I will draw this press conference to a close. Thank you very much to the journalists, and thank you very much to everybody who's listening.